Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our USAID panel discussion on Prepare Today, Protect Tomorrow, Becoming More Resilient to Climate Change. I'm Jason Frazier, the country representative here at USAID Jamaica. And this morning, for the next 45 minutes or so, we would like to highlight some of the work USAID has been doing in country with some of our key stakeholders. I would like to thank our panelists for accepting our invitation. We look forward to hearing from you all. And for those of you who are joining us via live stream, I'm also glad so many of you could take the time out of your day to learn how we're working together to provide opportunities to assist and help build resilience for the people of Jamaica. Now, today's event is in part a celebration of our long-term partnership in the Caribbean region, especially here in Jamaica. To celebrate this partnership, USAID last year launched the Neighbors, Partners, and Friends campaign, which highlights USAID's investment in the Caribbean region. As you know, the US and the Caribbean are a community with many shared values and interests. What affects one inevitably affects all of us. And together we can strengthen our resilience to disasters, make communities more vibrant, and also expand economic opportunities in Jamaica and the Caribbean. So today, and as we've done for decades, USAID has worked with Caribbean countries to recover from hurricanes, earthquakes, and other natural disasters. However, USAID does not wait for a disaster to strike. Year-round, we work to reduce the risk and impact of future disasters in the Caribbean. And to help communities prepare for future disasters, we've worked with local governments, humanitarian organizations in the region to develop emergency and evacuation plans, train natural disaster response organizations and first responders, and educate vulnerable communities and the people at large so they know what to do next when a storm hits the island. So we are also helping Caribbean nations become more resilient by working to bolster the resilience of the energy sector, given its critical importance to everyday life and to disaster recovery. So last week started the 2021 hurricane season. And so it's only fitting that this morning we are happy to welcome our panelists for an interesting discussion. Joining us this morning, we have the Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment, and Climate Change, the Honorable Pearnel Charles Jr. Thank you, Minister, for joining us. Also, virtually, we have our USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance and Office for Foreign Disaster Assistance Representative Tim Callaghan. Tim, welcome. And finally, and certainly not least, is our youth climate change activist and communications specialist, Ms. Dainalyn Swaby, to our program. Thank you for joining us. You'll be hearing about the actions the government of Jamaica is taking for the 2021 hurricane season and beyond, the work USAID is doing, and of course, our youth climate change activist will share her perspectives on what climate change means to her and how to get youth more involved. Again, thank you very much for joining us this morning. So let's just get started. Minister, tell us, it's evident that the government of Jamaica has acknowledged that climate change is real and poses an immediate threat to the environment and our health and safety. What specific goals and measures are being done to reduce the negative impacts caused by climate change and build resilience?
Well, let me firstly say thank you to USAID and our friends from the US Embassy for the opportunity to again have our voice heard on this critical topic. The theme for our discussion this morning is so important. Prepare today for tomorrow is even more critical because of all of the records that have been broken in terms of the rising temperatures, the more intense and frequent weather events, droughts, floodings, tropical cyclones that are occurring across the world. What it means is that for us as a small island developing state, we don't see it as a choice. It is a necessity for us to see climate change and the urgent action that is required as a priority. That is why we have designated this ministry, and along the common themes for our ministry, the goal is to advance sustainability and to build resilience. This is what is required, Dainalyn, if we are going to build our capacity to withstand the impacts of climate change. We have seen the examples in recent times where last year, 2020, we saw that the rising temperatures actually broke the record of 2019. What it means is that the empirical data, the evidence from our scientists about the catastrophe that will occur if the temperatures continue to rise, land and surface temperatures, and the expectation to have the repeated occurrences of rising temperatures back to back, it demands for us now to set our goals towards sustainability. So for the ministry, we are moving towards redefining our approach to the provision of shelter solutions by thinking about resilient mechanisms to build and to maintain sustainability in our housing sector. We are reinvigorating how we approach urban renewal in terms of enhancing the economic viability and environmental sustainability of those spaces. We are restoring the environment. And so even the theme, ecosystem restoration, for World Environment Week that has just passed, Environmental Awareness Week, and World Environment Day, is something which we are continuously focused on in terms of building the policy and regulatory framework towards restoring our environment. And last but definitely not least, reducing the impacts of climate change. And we know the buzzwords, mitigation, adaptation. I think everybody in the climate change area, and even those who are just lightly familiar, know mitigation and adaptation. But what does it mean? And what does the government see as the mechanisms to advance that? Well, in terms of mitigation, we are focused on reducing emissions locally. So even though we know, Tim, that we are among the lowest emitters and among the vulnerable group that is most greatly impacted, we still have a responsibility. We still have a responsibility to make sure that we are investing in renewables and doing what we can to reduce emissions. And so we have a target, which is 25.4% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions without international support. And with international support, we're looking at 28.5% reductions. We're also focused as a ministry and a government on, as I said, building resilience. And we do that and intend to continue doing that by securing and advancing infrastructure like the revetment that's being built downtown. That's going to enhance the aesthetics, but more importantly, it's going to protect us. It's going to protect us from flooding, protect our people, and protect our life and existence on this planet in this space that we call our beloved rock, and our livelihood. We're also focused, as we were discussing, on money. Because sometimes when they say climate financing, people are like, what is climate financing? We need cash to care. And so the government, through our prime minister primarily, who has been selected as one of the global leaders on this particular issue, is focused on advocating for the financing for the countries that need to build the capacity. We're the small, vulnerable, but we're partners, we're friends. And so we're very happy that in April, President Biden actually, I don't say reaffirmed, he affirmed the commitment of the United States as a leader in this sector. And he invited our Prime Minister, which I think also reaffirmed the leadership of Jamaica regionally and internationally I have the opportunity to serve as the co-chair of the NDC partnership with over 190 countries as members, myself and my UK colleague. And we're also leaders regionally. So there's a lot that's going on. We also have a number of specific activities um, focused on our 3 million trees in 3 years. And myself and John were out there planting on the grounds of the US Embassy with our children, which shows you that we're not just planting trees, but we're planting a seed in the minds of the young people of the importance of the environment and their own role in building resilience.
That's a good segue because, and I remember you and our Charge d'Affaires out here planting some trees, and that's been a well publicized in the local media. And over the years, as you know, USAID has worked with the government of Jamaica to help, mitigate the impacts of disaster and through the implementation of disaster risk reduction strategies and activities. But what I've noticed is how the young people of this country are really driven to be more climate resilient. Are there any activities, and you mentioned just one just a moment ago, but are there any other activities that the government of Jamaica is doing to rally young people to help tackle the issue around climate change?
So we engage and provide technical and financial support for the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council. We have ensured that we have youth representatives on our climate change advisory board, which is the premier council that advises me on the issue. We have had several engagements at schools and various communities across the country, and we always make sure to have the children involved and to break down the message, to make it palatable, to let them understand, to get their hands in the dirt, and to let them know that they play a role in defining their future. And we continue to have partnerships where we partnered recently with the British High Commission, and we had a really good session with our youth leaders there. There are radio shows, there are videos that we're doing, and also I'd like to think that Dainalyn is still a part of our youth. So even in this capacity, we try to look on our exemplary young leaders who are articulate and bright and wonderful and brilliant, and should come to the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, and Environment.
Is that a job offer?
Did I say that? Am I being recorded? My apologies. But no, but she's at another ministry doing great things. But what I'm saying is we have so many brilliant youngsters. Early in my tenure, we also put together the climate change A team. We need to do more to activate them as well. But I think that in everything that I've done, in every ministry, even this one, I've always had youth as a focus. The We Transform program, the cadets, all of these things. Even recently, we planted 550 seedlings with our cadets in St. Mary. So we recognize not just in what we say, but in what we do, in our actions in the ministry. We have shown and established that the youth are critical to climate action. And we're going to continue to create platforms for them to shine. And as we move towards COP26, it is my intention through the NDC partnership as well to build out more material and resources that are interesting to them. So we can let the discussion be one that they want to engage in. Not that we're forcing it on you, but you want to engage. That's why I've actually asked Mr. McNish, one of my advisors, who is also telling me he's young. I'm not sure if he still is in a young bracket, but so he and others are in charge now of putting together those groupings and meetings for us to have the young people define for me what they see as the solutions to getting effective communication to them.
This is great, and we're going to get some more youth feedback from Dainalyn on this very topic. But before we do that, I wanted to just jump over, and we'll get back to you as well, Minister, But I just did want to jump right now to someone who has been on the USAID team for about 20 years and is a leader in the face of disaster. Since we were talking about disaster, I mentioned it a couple of times. On the line, we have Tim Callaghan, who's the USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance in Latin America and the Caribbean Senior Regional Advisor based in Costa Rica, San Jose, Costa Rica. And Tim has been the principal Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance representative in the region with overall responsibility for response and preparedness efforts. Tell us, Tim, a bit more about your line of work.
Sure. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. My role in our role, I work for USAID, but we work in humanitarian assistance. Our main focus is, our mandate is save lives and alleviate suffering. It's emergency response. A lot of what we do before an emergency response, we dedicate a lot of our effort into building capacity, working hand in hand with governments. Our normal counterpart, for example, in Jamaica is ADPEM. So the National Disaster Organization is our primary counterpart. We work closely, of course, with the Red Cross throughout the Caribbean. We work closely with firefighters. And so that work to build capacity is critical for us. One of the things, I was thinking as I was listening this morning, I think these discussions right now, hurricane season 2021 has started. There's up to 20 tropical storms forecast. We can't forecast if any storm will hit Jamaica this year or not. But I think it's so critical to always prepare, no matter what the number of storms is. If it's 20 or 8, we should still prepare. I also think it's important to always remember all it takes is one. We saw the devastation last year from 2 major hurricanes in Central America. In 2019, we saw the devastation from Hurricane Dorian and the impact that had in the Bahamas, the devastation of Abaco and Grand Bahama. I also use a phrase which I think is important called exchange the business cards now. I think the opportunity to share information, revisit how we work together, I think is critical. So my office, we coordinate the U.S. government response if a country makes a request. Everything we do is coordinated with the ambassador, with the USAID mission, in this case in Jamaica. We have staff all throughout the islands. We have a permanent person in Jamaica, Ms. Mullins, who again works with ADPEM, works with the Red Cross, and we have local consultants in all the countries, all the islands. We're reviewing our plans right now. I think that's critical to look at and working with our counterparts throughout the region for evacuation plans, for contingency plans. Obviously, I think what's very important in hurricane season is the early warning systems. We're having each embassy has a focal point for emergencies who would then work with the local country. And so again, we're doing training for that staff right now. We're reviewing our supplies that a country may request. For example, in St. Vincent, we responded, we're talking about, I know in preparing for hurricanes, but we have recently responded and supported the government of St. Vincent after the volcano eruption. So we brought in supplies. We have been funding other partners, the World Food Program, known for food assistance, but in the Caribbean, we're funding them for preparedness efforts related to logistics. And also in the emergency in Dorian 2019, they worked hand in hand with the government of Bahamas in the area of logistics. Also with St. Vincent, logistics was a request, and then we provided that support through the World Food Program. We can tap into other federal agencies. So for example, we tap into our scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey, and they have been providing technical assistance and equipment for the St. Vincent emergency eruption. Again, I think that the time to prepare, we work year round in building capacity, training, technical assistance. We certainly hope that there are no major impacts for Jamaica this year, but we are prepared again, to coordinate and collaborate if the government of Jamaica were to make a request for U.S. government assistance. Maybe with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim, and also for explaining what USAID does, what the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance does to help Caribbean countries to recover from hurricanes, earthquakes, and other natural disasters. Can you, just based on your experience, can you maybe just talk about what best practices can persons adopt when preparing for a natural disaster or hurricane?
Yeah, I think having contingency plans now are really important. Historically, the busy time for storms is August, September, and October. So I think having family plans, having contingency plans, understanding in your community where the evacuation plans, what the evacuation plans are, understanding shelters. Where are the shelters in a community if a major hurricane was heading toward Jamaica? And obviously, I think part of a lot of planning for countries now, not only in preparing shelters, in communicating to the population if a storm is approaching, but also obviously following what you're seeing here is COVID protocols. That clearly has changed the dynamic. We worked with the Red Cross a lot last year when families were evacuated from the two major storms. So I also think communication is critical. Communicating early and often. I think the ability to forecast and the early warning systems for storms has gotten so much better. But I think watching as storms are approaching, because again, storms can go faster, and then you want to ensure that you have your plans in place. So that's why, for me, doing a lot of that work now is so important. The communication part is critical. That if a storm is approaching, to ensure that people are listening to the guidance that they're receiving from the government, that they're getting from scientists, where the storm may impact. A lot of times also, I think the communication of, if it's a major hurricane, just because the wind has passed, I think it's critical to remember not to go back outside until the government has given the all clear. I also have seen where folks, hurricanes come and they want to stand near windows. I mean, I think just understanding the potential impacts of a major hurricane, the wind destruction it can cause on buildings and structures, and understanding that and having a plan to keep you and your family safe are practices we have seen that work. But again, I think as far as governments, the early coordination between whether it's with SEDEMA, ODPEM, partners, the UN, I think that piece is critical to ensure that a government can reach out quickly after an event and know what friends and partners they can call upon and what sort of expertise they have. Doing that now, preparing that part now, is a practice we've seen that, again, exchanging that information now is critical, because to do that during an emergency wouldn't be a good practice. But to prepare now for that, I think, has proven successful over the years that I've worked. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Tim, and thank you for your participation and your service as part of the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance and explaining to us the cross-section between climate change and disaster response, which obviously has both are hand in hand with, as we've seen in other parts of the world, a lot of the major disasters that happen in countries are because the climate change policies and climate change adaptation has not occurred, and the disasters actually have had more significant impact than in other places. So thank you for that, and we hope we won't be needing you or your DART team anytime soon. So thank you for participating. I know that you have to go to another meeting, but I want to thank you for taking the time to meet with us and discuss about what the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance and your office does. So we had an opportunity to talk to the minister for a bit, and of course now we've talked to Tim Callaghan and the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. I want to bring you in, Dainalyn, into the conversation, because as the minister was mentioning earlier, we were talking about youth and youth involvement in the area of climate change, and I think it's a good segue into hearing some of your viewpoints on that matter. Just so the audience knows, so Dainalyn is a climate communicator. However, her role as she was, I should say, a communications specialist of the USAID-supported JAREACH activity. And JAREACH is the Jamaica Rural Economy Ecosystems Adapting to Climate Change program that catapulted her to tackle some of the challenges of climate change for the country. Dainalyn recently returned from her studies in the UK and is currently working. So Dainalyn, tell us, what do you believe is needed to encourage youth in Jamaica that climate change is real and has a significant impact on our society?
First of all, thank you, Mr. Fraser, for the platform. And I have to acknowledge my gratitude to USAID. As you mentioned, it gave me my jump start into advocating and championing the cause of climate change. Now, I think based on my engagement and my experience personally and professionally, I don't think young people need convincing that climate change is real. I recently completed my studies, Global Communication and Development at Loughborough University, London. And the focus of my dissertation was Jamaican youth responses to climate engagement, which really looked at, what do they think about climate change and how is it that we can move forward to connecting with them and really placing them on the front lines. But we had to really, distill what their views were. And in speaking to a lot of youth, I would have found that they were it's our lived experience, the impacts of climate change. And they're able to articulate the trends, the impacts, and in some spaces, the solutions where we found gaps. So they don't need convincing. We need a lot more mechanisms for participation. And I heard the minister speak about, finding these opportunities or providing opportunities for you to take action. And I really want to underscore and support that, because when we think about the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, when I think about the Climate Change Division, a lot of young people, we're having the privilege to engage. And these organizations, the ministry, the focal point, which is the CCD, they are committed to providing the platform for young people to be at the table. So no longer at the kiddie table, but to be at the actual table. Minister spoke about co-chair in Jamaica being co-chairs of the NDC partnership. I am the returning youth representative to the youth task force for the NDC partnership. And this was carved out through the climate change division. So we are not just paying lip service when we speak about including youth. And I'm happy, that this is something that Jamaica is getting recognition for. So our ambition is recognized internationally, and the impact is being felt locally that we want young people to take action. Now, some of the critical challenges as it relates to youth inclusion in climate change, Minister mentioned financing. A lot of community-based projects, or young people are able to identify the challenges in their community. What is it that they would want to do? But some persons may feel discouraged, or they feel as if, they can't go as far because they don't have the funding, they don't have the technical capacity. And also, young people we want to shift away from just one dimension of climate engagement. I know, of course, with the elephant in the room being COVID, and we have to adapt. There has been a lot more virtual engagement on forums, and that is important because you always need that component of awareness raising. But there's another step. It's always about closing that gap between awareness and action. And, I'm happy that I'm able to represent to people as a climate communicator, because it shows that you don't have to be a science-based person, to be a part of climate action. My international studies, my local engagement, I've met other young people who are within the climate space. You have youth who are working in disaster risk resilience as engineers, as policy advisors, as analysts. Tim mentioned Hurricane Dorian. I have a colleague from Bahamas who is conducting regional studies as it relates to improving resilience mechanisms across the Caribbean. I've met and worked with climate finance specialists, youth climate finance specialists from Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the African region. So, and I'm saying these as examples so that more young people can understand that tree planting is good and it's very important, but it's about the exposure, and that there are professional opportunities as well, and means to which that we can contribute. And there is a creative section as well. I have another colleague who is currently studying fashion, sustainability fashion, and hoping to bring back his findings and applications to Jamaica, and a space for collaboration. So I know I said a lot, but and I am hoping I'm not rambling, but as I am making the case that the encouragement, what is needed is just really more opportunities. And that is happening, with the local and international partners. We have the pitch competitions that are appealing to young people, because entrepreneurship, apart from climate change mitigation and adaptation, entrepreneurship and eco-entrepreneurship is a buzzword.
Mhm.
So young people are concerned about their career trajectory, about their financial opportunities, and then they can have there's an intersection where they can channel their talents, their creativity, and also the priorities for their career into one space where they're also addressing environment challenges. And a lot of organizations, the USAID, you have the British High Commission, UNDP, the Global Water Partnership, they are carving out more opportunities for young people to really utilize and apply their skill sets in ways that can enhance resilience in Jamaica and the Caribbean.
Now, you also have and you were talking about your role as a climate communicator. So you have a podcast show, right?
Yes.
And here locally, and was it on Radio Jamaica? Or?
Well, actually, I call it Global Yadi. So the inspiration for Global Yadi is also linked to climate change. Having had the privilege of attending the first UN Youth Climate Summit in New York in 2019. And I recognize, of course, it was a very overwhelming time and meeting of the minds, but I still felt as if the Caribbean and the developing country representation could be stronger. But sometimes in advocacy, it's not just vocalizing and lobbying for change. You have to fill the gap. And I thought, I want to build on the platform that connects me with the experiences I've had, engaging people from across the world. And I think also, instead of the static communication and transfer of what climate change is and how to take action, sometimes you have to demonstrate and show examples. So having a podcast where I'm able to interview people from across the world who are taking climate action, that is a live or real-time demonstration of what somebody else can do, and also building opportunities for further collaborations and linkages. So Global Yadi, I know that we may have a global audience at this time. So Yadi, a Jamaican living outside of Jamaica. So I was so thrilled that for temporarily I was not based in Jamaica, but just capitalizing on that and meeting people globally. So I brought that together, and I was able to interview people from across 24 countries. I collaborated with almost people from 15 countries to produce that podcast as it relates to the interviews and all of that. So it was truly a global production, but from climate finance, climate justice, climate activism, so many diverse topics, and to spotlight young people from developing countries, especially who are doing amazing thing. A young man from Africa who, he united 169 countries under his movement. So it's just a further encouragement for young people all the time, showing them more examples, more ways that they can do something about the issue.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for clarifying for our audience out there what YARDI means. So now you all know in the US and other places. And there was something that you said, and you mentioned entrepreneurship and the business community, and I wanted to get back to something that the minister was communicating as well, because he mentioned that that this isn't something that government can do on its own, right? It's the government, it's youth, but it's also businesses in the private sector, and so I guess this is a really question for you, Minister Charles. Would you say it's essential then for businesses to develop their own climate change strategies, or should they, how should they develop those, and how do you work with them in the development of those? And then also, how do you encourage what Dainalyn said about entrepreneurship in the climate change sphere? Are there government policies that can encourage that? Because as we're seeing now, whether in the US or in other places, there's a whole ecosystem around climate change. It's not just, what's good for the environment, it's good for business. It's good for business, it's good for entrepreneurship, and people are actually thinking about it in a different way. What do you say to that?
No, I mean, for sure, it is without a doubt essential for companies, businesses to have strategies that are specific to their own industry. As you said, it is good for business. Introduction of innovation for long-term sustainability is going to assist you in improving efficiency and improving and exceeding your targets. You're going to enhance your profit generation, and you're going to build the resilience of your own company. So introduction of this kind of thinking and turning it into a different type of action is going to help business in the long run. One of the things we recognize is that the government has a responsibility of addressing the policy and regulatory framework, but it is the private sector that must now take the lead in terms of implementation, particularly because they have the financial capacity to do so. We in the government are advancing several strategies, and we are creating as best as we can the enabling framework that is going to allow for business to be able to springboard, particularly in this post-COVID economic recovery that we're moving towards. What we recognize is that no matter the type of company, whether it is a large company, small company, brick and mortar, online, every single business, every individual is going to and is already impacted by the effects of climate change. The transportation industry, for instance, is seeing, tourism sector, for instance, is seeing and absorbing the impacts, the negative impact of the climate change and the COVID issues. But you also have other business interests that are pushed and compelled to expand and stretch their own activity. And so you see where the introduction of innovation is expanding their opportunities, moving towards the kind of sustainable practices that are allowing for their employees to bring in creativity and to expand opportunities for inventions and the nature-based solutions. These are things which move beyond, as you said, just awareness and catchphrases to action. In the government, we have the Green Business Investment Strategy and other strategies and long-term strategies that we are carving out now, which will present the framework to enhance and to allow for business to know that this is the trajectory of your government. This is the trajectory.
Incentives, is there sort of like a tax incentive?
So we're looking on all spheres of incentivizing, of creating the policy structure that gives a focus and allows for business to see the benefit in doing business in a particular way. When people do the right thing, they need to be given the advantage and the benefit of absorbing, not just in terms of cash value, but for government to respond and to acknowledge that the business sector, the private sector is playing their role in transitioning towards the kind of practices that are going to allow for a better, stronger future for Jamaica. So yes, our strategies take into consideration incentives. It creates that parameter and framework within which we think government can lead the private sector towards the business practice that's going to protect life and livelihood. And it enhances the resilience. The bottom line is that we have to have public-private partnerships and policies and programs that lead towards resilience. Any other investment is a wasted investment. They've learned that. So we look at our unique characteristics and we move towards the shift, as you said, towards energy efficiency, not just because it is what the world is doing. As I said before, these are not options, these are necessities. We have to do this considering our vulnerability and our size, and to create an attractive Jamaica where you will be able to say to me, Minister, we have 100 companies in America that want to come to Jamaica because Jamaica has this policy, because Jamaica has this kind of framework, because Jamaica invites as an attractive jurisdiction companies that have as their priority sustainability and resilience.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. There's a lot there, and I wish we had enough time to unpack all of that. We don't, but we definitely have to have you back if my colleagues tell me it's okay to go in and dig deeper in that. But we definitely have to talk about some of those issues, because I think there really is a need for private sector, not only to encourage private sector, but also to develop a new private sector space for climate resilient, entrepreneurship and things like that, as Dainalyn was just mentioning. And Dainalyn, I wanted to get back to you because obviously you worked on a USAID funded program, JAREACH. Can you tell us a little bit about your role there as the communication specialist, advisor, and what the activity entailed?
Okay, so for context and maybe more relevant to this conversation, That was a thrilling experience, let me just say.
Yeah.
And more so because as a communication coordinator, I had the privilege of not just being stationed at my desk.
Right.
I had the opportunity to undertake a lot of outreach and engagement projects, and connecting with youth groups, community-based organizations, government agencies, through different interventions, activities that really stress the importance of climate responsiveness and integrating climate change in the work that we do. We had staged a flagship youth climate change conference through the life of the project that would have engaged or impacted over 3,000 stakeholders. The latter part of that project, or the climate conference in and of itself, was expanded to an international reach, including 8 countries in the Caribbean and Japan. And that project also, or that conference staging also, helped to really catapult other young people into international representation. And that also ties back to my earlier point of providing opportunities for young people to be a part of climate action, because some persons may be thrilled to join or listen in on a Facebook Live conversation such as this, and then the opportunity to travel to represent your country will thrill somebody, because maybe it's the opportunity to travel, but then the context and the exposure that you get from that travel will link to other opportunities and help to underscore how serious climate change is. So through the JA Reach project, there were so many other activities that we would have done, traveling to schools across Jamaica, to other exhibitions and fairs. And even Minister had spoke about the importance of tree planting initiatives. We did a lot of those. One of the things that definitely stood out for me was a Labor Day project that was organized through USAID at the Alligator Head Foundation, where we were able to bring together urban and rural young people to plant mangrove seedlings. And one of the importance of that activity is that you merge activity and communication, so people understand the importance of what they're doing. So yes, we know on the surface it's important to plant trees, to plant mangroves, but having that session to really drill down what are the roles and the critical roles that mangroves play in climate mitigation, absorbing carbon dioxide as carbon sinks, and also protecting against storm surges and all that. I don't want to go into a lesson, but I say that because that resonated with young people. And throughout that project, I was able to have dialogue with a lot of youth and see where they didn't really understand. Because when people hear climate change, they think it's so sciencey. And you recognize, as a communicator that isn't of a science background, I had that unique opportunity to really enhance the relatability aspect. So as soon as you speak about drought, as soon as you speak about the local impacts that people are familiar with, then you see the difference in the response, and the ideas are coming out as to what can I do in my community, or even how can I merge that in my academic fields or my other areas of interest. And that's why the passion that I have and the motivation that I have, it is further spurred, because I recognize that the conversation needs to translate in an organic way. And when I say conversation, I don't just mean talking, but there is that need for that translation. When I think about COVID and the impacts of COVID, young people, because coming from that project and even now, people are now realizing, not just government speaking about pivoting. Young people recognize that our resilience structure should not just focus on natural hazards, but it has to focus on the non-natural. COVID happening, we see what happened recently with Laissez-faire in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So I'm just saying that project, that starting point, it helped me to think big picture, and in terms of climate engagement and the layers. It's a discursive process, the layers of conversation and the level of work that has to be done to really bring more youth into the fold. And it's just always a matter of finding ways to appeal to them through activities, through platforms of representation. So some persons, it may be from a point of them being negatively impacted. We've worked in communities where we had to implement early warning systems, people who have lost their homes due to flooding. One of them, another inspiring event, we had an environmental awareness through music workshop, where we recognized that there was a particular community in Portland where there was a need for proper disposal of garbage, because it was impacting the downflow from the kill to the stream. So ridge to reef, the impact of poor environmental practices and improper garbage disposal. And they wanted to bring young people in, but they were not initially interested, but a lot of them were aspiring musicians. So we thought of a way to conduct an environmental awareness workshop where we'd equip them with the music production skills, and also find a way to help them channel this skill and creativity, and also incorporate environmental messaging through that. And it really took off. You know, they had opportunity to not just perform, but I recognize that they were able to articulate so well the issue in song, and it's different in conversation. So that's another point that drives home. You know, you have to find as many ways as possible to connect with young people. Not everybody has a conversation in the same way.
You know, it's very interesting when you were talking, and a thought occurred to me about the intersection between tourism and climate change, and the not just in terms of the economic impact, but just in terms of the impact of tourism on climate, the climate impacts of tourism, basically. Yes. And the minister, I was just curious in terms of, because Jamaica is such a tourist dependent economy. I mean, as many countries in the Caribbean are, you know, trying to balance that need for tourists, obviously, to come into the country, spend their dollars, stay at the hotels, stay at the bed and breakfasts and Airbnbs that are maybe around. That's a huge you know, that's huge for the government of Jamaica in terms of their economy. But on the same token, there could be climate and impacts and having large tourist numbers in certain parts of the country. How is the government dealing with that, and how are you working with maybe the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association or some of the other private sector partners on that? And then and just to let you know that we're about to wrap this up, and I'm going to ask both of you one more question, but I just wanted to get your point on that.
So we engage with the Ministry of Tourism. The Ministry of Tourism actually has a tourism resilience center, and we will be advancing some discussions on how we can partner towards the integration of all of our policies and considerations in anything going forward for the Ministry of Tourism, as well as all ministries. Appreciate that climate change, it has to be mainstreamed, not just tourism, but across government. So we actually have focal points in every single ministry with a view to ensuring that the trajectory of government policy, regulatory framework, and actions is grounded in the need for us to identify our vulnerability, to look on what we have to do to advance ourselves economically, and to ensure that our plans are considering those sensitivities. So as you said, yes, we need to build our tourist product, but building it without considering sustainability is not a useful investment. So for us to make the best of it, we are starting the discussion. We're going to continue the discussion and make sure that whatever we do has that alignment. And you're going to see, I think, within the next month or two, some more robust partnership being exposed between the ministry, also the Ministry of Health in terms of public health considerations and how that ties into also the impacts of climate change.
Well, I wanted to thank both of you, but I have one more question for the both of you for your comments this morning. And I'll start with Dainalyn. Obviously, you have an audience not only here in Jamaica, but potentially globally. They're listening to you and want to know, you know, as a young person, as a climate change activist, what is it that you would like to impart to the young people out there in terms of climate change adaptation, and what we need to do to secure our environment?
Okay, that's heavy, but I mean, it's always a critical, most important question to round out the conversation and for reflection as well. I'd also want to make the case, I probably am an outgoing youth. I'm like in the departure lounge. And I only say that because it's a continued process when we talk about climate action. Because of my podcast, I've started to listen to other podcasts, and I'll never forget this episode I had listened on TED Talks, where there was a climate activist who is now 40 years old. And I say that because she made the case that 28 years ago, she would have attended, don't check me on the math, but the point is 28 years ago, she would have made a presentation at the Rio Summit in 1992. I was born in 1992. And the message that she delivered at the Rio Summit would have been a similar message Greta Thunberg, the Eleanor Terrelongs of Jamaica, and all the other activists across the world when we're imploring governments to take action. But then there is something else, and I said it earlier in my conversation, is that young people, we also have to find ways to fill the gap. And what else can we do? We have the privilege in Jamaica, even though we still continue to advocate for our government to stay on track as it relates to climate ambition and commitments. But we have a government that's committed to giving young people the platform and listening to young people, having nominated me to represent Jamaica on the NDC partnership. And we contributed to a global engagement plan to engage young people, to instruct how governments should engage young people in relation to NDCs, which are the nationally determined contributions for the climate commitments of each country. But the point that I'm making is that we need to be more aware and conscious and present to say that we are bringing solutions to the table, and we have to be proactive and demanding as well, and not in a disrespectful or maybe disruptive, but not necessarily, but not at all in a disrespectful way. But we have to meet people halfway, and that's what we want youth to do. We're not the kind of, we don't want to be the kind of youth population that's saying government isn't doing this, or why aren't other people doing this. We're standing in the gap, and I think that's the encouragement I want to say to young people. And we're working. We have young Jamaicans recently. Minister and I would have shared a panel showing some innovative solutions to fight climate change in Jamaica, and especially along the lines of climate mitigation and community-based adaptation. Recently, we have young Jamaicans who are looking at innovations in seaweed farming, constructing artificial wetlands. A colleague of mine constructing artificial wetlands in a community in Trelawney to mitigate against flooding and all of that. And there's so many other examples, youth in agriculture. So young people are not just having this tunnel vision as to what climate change response is. So it's about just, recognizing that we can harness our own skills and creativity and talent, and to just, how can we solve issues? Let's solve it instead of waiting on others to solve it. Because as I'm a part of the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council, and the CEO loves to say, we are the generation that will live climate change. And, we don't want to be 28 years later appealing to world leaders to take action. It's going to be about us answering the next generation. What did we do when everyone else was asleep?
Because the knowledge is there now. People know what's happening. It's not like it was 20 years ago in 1992, huh? Okay. All right. No, thank you, Dainalyn, and we do definitely wish you all the best with your climate endeavors. You all can check out Dainalyn's story right here on our U.S. Embassy Facebook page. But before we wrap up, I did want to give the minister a chance to really sort of give the government's view on, what is essential for a climate resilient Jamaica under our theme today: prepare today, protect tomorrow. What would you say, Minister?
I think one of the, three things that I would identify. One would be communication. I think it is essential for us to have a robust and consistent communication on the need for urgent action on these issues. And so having a climate communicator, having the youth being involved at the forefront, making climate change a priority in terms of even the ministry, moving it out of just being a division to being a portfolio area, and the leadership of the minister, prime minister, the lead from our CCD division. These are things which are relevant and necessary for us to communicate the message. I think another thing is to advance the partnership locally, within private sector, schools, churches, communities, regionally, with other small island developing states, within the Latin American Caribbean region, and even outside of our region, and internationally, where you would notice that our Prime Minister has been recognized by the UN Secretary General, where we have a ministerial, relevance at the NDC partnership, youth relevance in terms of leadership at the NDC partnership, and an expectation that Jamaica is going to continue to lead on the message, which moves us to the third thing: climate financing. It takes cash to care. we need to continue to advocate and to move the discussion and financing to ensuring that we achieve the goals that have already been set. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We've had this discussion already. The US $100 billion was identified as the mark, the target. And we have to ensure that our partners and friends that had made commitments to that are living up to those commitments. That's why when we met with the other partners globally at the recent summit led by President Biden, the discussion and the articulation from Jamaica was focused on climate financing. How can we move towards vulnerability measures being, prime considerations in how we define financing? How can we look at the development of disaster risk funds to help us to mitigate and to be able to respond and rebound from disasters that are coming and that we know are coming because of the impacts of climate change? And how can we ensure that we are pushing our friends and partners across the globe to live up to commitments that are necessary for us to live? It's that simple. So in terms of our life and existence and the livelihood, we need to integrate measures to be informed on how to develop properly, to develop in a sustainable way. So financing is needed, communication is needed, and partnership is needed at all levels.
Thank you so much, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dainalyn. And for Tim Callaghan on the line. And Tim had to leave us a little bit early, but we're glad for his participation as well. Well, I believe that we have reached our time. But on behalf of the U.S. government and USAID, I want to thank each of our panelists for joining us this morning. As it says up here, as neighbors, partners, and friends, we are with Jamaica. We hope that this panel discussion has been interesting and useful for all of you out there. We believe that planning today will allow us to better protect tomorrow in an effort to build a more resilient society and a more resilient Jamaica. So thank you, Minister Charles. Thank you, Tim Callaghan, and thank you, Dainalyn Swaby, for accompanying us today. A special thanks to my colleagues at the Public Affairs section. You all can't see them, but they're right back there, for allowing us to use this space to share our work. And a very special thank you to all of you who are part of the virtual audience today. So have a nice day and have a nice weekend. Thank you all very much.